another concept that went a little bit deeper into the system of the four worlds of the Kabbalistic tree of life. And so what we'll talk about tonight is really what is the four worlds system, how explained, and then actually I'll get into in the later half, how do you practically apply it? Because I think that's another thing that you see missing in a lot of esoteric philosophy. You get, all these like descriptions, the best way we can describe abstract concepts, and then you're kind of left on your own to figure out, well, now what do I do with that? Right? I have this new knowledge, but how do I turn knowledge into wisdom? And so I'll do my best to try to make it a practical guide of the four worlds. And so let me give you an example of kind of reading at a different layer, deeper than what's at the surface level. So, for example, one thing, one Bible verse that jumped out at me in my studies comes from Matthew 3:11, which this is a quote from Jesus that says, "I baptize you with water for repentance." Sorry, this is John the Baptist. "But after me," talking about Jesus Christ, comes one who is more powerful than I, whose sandals I'm not worthy to carry. He will baptize you with the Holy Spirit and with fire. Okay, so how can someone baptize you with fire? That was the first, wait a minute, there's something else going on here. But even then, I've even bolded, it's kind of hard to see with the white on white, but certain words in here, when you highlight the word fire, you highlight the word spirit, you highlight the word water, and then, logically, you baptize, or the object that's being baptized is you, an earthly creation. Now, all of a sudden, I'm saying earth, water, air, and fire. Well, that just jumped right out of me as some sort of alchemical illusion, right? That there's something there that's worth unpacking a little bit more, because if you read it at the literal level, there's something that's left wanting. How can someone be baptized by fire? Does this imply like a higher level of baptism? Because John the Baptist is baptizing with water, but then Jesus will baptize you with the Spirit and the fire. Is this higher baptism more authentic? And again, because they're alchemical classical elements, I wanted to explore further what that meant. So anyway, when I do my studies on some of the basic Kabbalistic structures, looking at the Lurianic tradition, we all seen this tree of life pattern. I try to stop and think about how do I apply these different sphirot in my daily life. I contemplate what they mean in my relationship with my creator, as well as then how to apply this balance of the tree of life in the manifestation of my own personal reality. One of the many challenges of Kabbalistic contemplation is kind of like the recursive and nested relationships. There's a lot going on here, and obviously it'll take a lifetime to unpack. You can have an entire tree inside of one of the Sphiro, like that's one thing, that there's a Keter in Chakma, and there's a Yesod in Chakma and all that. And so there's just so many ways you can read this framework for us to interpret. But one of those systems of reading that is the four worlds of the Kabbalah, first introduced in the Zohar and then expanded upon in many other texts. So let's dive into what those four worlds are. The four worlds or levels of the Kabbalah are called, from bottom to top, Asiya, Yetzirah, Bariya, and Atzilut, and are thus explained. Asiya, the lowest, is the world of action. Yetzirah, the world of formation. Bariya is the world of creation. And Atzilut, derived from a Hebrew word meaning standing near or being close, as in being closer to God, is the world of emanation. the world of the spirit. What's fascinating is when you look at the Hebrew words and what they mean. Obviously, anyone who's tried to look at Hebrew meanings you can start to get the double meanings. You start to see what's really implied, because there's a lot lost in translation, especially into English. And so these Hebrew words do have important meanings when you're discussing how this system applies to God creating, the heavens and the earth. So let's talk about what that means in the context of creation. Okay, so now that you can look at the Hebrew, you understand why Genesis was written the way it was. The very first sentence in Genesis 1, something that a lot of Masons are familiar with, actually uses the word create, bara, which is the root word of Berea, we just talked about, the realm of creation proper. And I just wanted to kind of go in here, like the very first line of Genesis 1:1, transliterated from Hebrew, and I'm going to do a horrible job trying to pronounce this, but it's transliterated Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz. And so you can see the highlighted in point number 2 of the second of the 7 words, bara, literally means he created or is creating. So we're talking about this aspect of creation, but there's other levels as well. The second creation account in Genesis, which I don't have a slide for here, actually uses the word yetzar to form, right? Because absolute's the divine, Berea is creation, and then yetzar is the formation world. And then Asiya is the physical world, not mentioned until the very end of the creation story. So the Hebrew words are used in order from, creation to formation to actual physical manifestation. And so what's fascinating, if you read through the Hebrew words, you actually find out that the majority of the Genesis story takes place in Yetzirah, because it uses the word Yetzar, especially in the Garden of Eden. Therefore, the Garden of Eden, it was and is not of this physical world. It is of a formulative world. The physical world where we live is the world of exile from Eden. And so looking at it from a literal Hebrew interpretation, this is evidence that Genesis wasn't actually meant to be taken as an account of physical creation. Right? That's what words mean, things. So things get lost in translation when you when you convert those to English. Another example of this, and the primary evidence for the 4 specific worlds, comes from an inner Judaism interpretation of Genesis 28, verses 10 through 13. And as you can see by the picture here, this is about Jacob's ladder, right? Jacob's dream. Let's read about Jacob's dream at Bethel. So, verse 10, Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And there above the ladder, stood the Lord. Now, Maimonides, who is an influential Torah scholar during the Middle Ages, he deduced that not only was this story a parable, not literal, but a parable, and there were also 4 steps of Jacob's ladder. First, where it says a ladder was set into the earth, that actually represents the material world, right? The ladder is on the material world. And then the second rung is the summit reaching up to heaven. Okay, so now we have the top of the ladder, representing the world of imagination and forms and emotion. Rung 3, and the angels of God went up and down on it. So it represents the world of intellect, thinking, intuition. And then finally, and behold, God stood above it, representing the world of the will, the world closest to God, which we know now as absolute. So this is where the concept of the four worlds and the four principal four rungs of Jacob's ladder apply in Talmudic interpretation. But let's go deeper, right? We got to go a little bit more deeper. There's also colors associated with the four worlds, and they also have symbolic meanings as well. Okay, Asiya, logically, it's red. And so again, I'm always going to do things from the bottom up, because I'm going to start at the physical world and work up to the spiritual heavenly world. Adam, literally means red in Hebrew, and is supposed to have the connotation of the red ground or red clay that Adam was formed by. Now let's skip over Yetzirah for a second, and let's look at Beriah, which is the color blue, representing the heavens in all senses of the word. And then therefore, which I find fascinating, is that Yetzirah is the union between the lower part of the heavens, the blue, with the formulative part of the earth, the red, which makes the color purple. It's the union between the two, right? As above, so below. There's the intersection in between. And finally, absolute represents the purity of the divine and its luminosity, and is therefore represented by the color white. Now, companions of the Holy Royal Arch will immediately get a better appreciation for the purpose and colors of each veil, even if they might be in a different order. Now, as a side note, I've read a couple things that give me enough clues that might be a good research topic for another day about the Kabbalistic Tree of Life and how it overlays with at least the American working of the Royal Arch officer line and how it's all established. So if you want something to go off and spring off and do more research on, that's a good topic. Now, there's another four-state model that I've been familiar with too, that I alluded to earlier, right? Alchemy, or classical alchemy, using classical elements. They have a similar four-state model representing various levels of ascension. Earth, its lowest form, represents all that is earthly and material. Next comes water, that ebbs and flows like the currents of our emotions. Third, the swiftness of air represents a swift intellect. And then finally, fire represents the spiritual aspect of our being. But why stop there? So in addition, Frater or brother A.E. Waite, he has the most popular tarot deck system, the Rider-Waite Smith tarot deck. And he purposefully gave Pamela Smith directions of how he wanted his artwork done on his tarot system. So there's no accidents in the Rider-Waite system, Rider-Waite-Smith system, because he was very deliberate about putting symbolism that actually means something and not left for major interpretation. So when he laid out the system, he wanted to have four similar suits to the four levels that we just talked about. The pentacles represent the material wealth of earthly items. The cups to hold the water of our fluid emotions. Swords to swiftly cut through the intellectual air. And the wooden wands of virality that are the kindling fire and represent spiritual attainment and project management. So remember, A.E. Waite was a Freemason and an SRIA member himself. He deliberately placed these esoteric designs in his deck to be discovered by those ready to receive. Looking at another system, the Jewish Kabbalists, they conceived the soul of having five levels of the soul, right? So you have different levels of spiritual attainment internally. Each level has a name and represents the various aspects of the divine soul in man. Again, starting at the bottom, Nefesh is the lowest and most basic aspect of the soul. This part of the soul is what gives us the ability to move, eat, breathe, reproduce, basic basic human functions. You would think of it scientifically, very much like the limbic system, the reptilian brain that we have. Like we just wake up, we eat, we reproduce, go to sleep, right? As you can see, there's not much more here than our reptilian nature. But next is Ruach, the second level of the soul. Ruach means spirit in Hebrew and corresponds to emotions, right? Ruach manifests itself as beings who embrace their emotional side of compassion, of caring, of love, humility, and awe, right? For example, if you've ever teared up at the sight of a beautiful sunset, you've experienced Ruach, right? The third level of the soul is Neshama and relates to the higher soul, where now people will meditate on God and they'll try to have an intellectual understanding of the world and their spirituality. Fourth is Chaya, which corresponds to the spiritual world of emanation. People who rise above the levels of emotion and intellect to become spiritual beings with purpose and a greater sense of spiritual reality exist up here. And then finally, the fifth level is the level of Yakida, which represents really the most inward journey and divine spark. Kabbalists see this level as the level where the divine and the soul actually make contact, right? You could pray, for your whole lifetime and maybe experience Yakida once, right? It's that highest level of attainment. But you can start to see a lot of similarities and patterns between these fourfold systems. So another fourfold structure that comes to mind is the Jewish exegesis framework known as Pardes. Now, Pardes is an acronym that's made up of the first letter of each approach to biblical study. Now we can start to see this four-level hierarchy kind of in practice. So how would you apply these four levels into your study? Well, Peshat, the lowest level, is the surface, straight, or the literal direct meaning of any text you read, right? So this is just literally reading the words off the page, not thinking anything more beyond that. And by the way, there are similar, you could apply the same Pardes methodology for any of your other types of biblical or spiritual texts as well. So it's not just limited to Jewish exegesis, but there are similar frameworks, say for like Christian meditation and that kind of thing. So there's the literal. Then above Peshat is Remez. The Remez level hints at the deep allegoric, hidden, or symbolic meanings just beyond the literal sense. Well, what is he really trying to say here? What's the message I'm trying to get out of the text? Then you get to Darash, which means to inquire or to seek. And this is where you have comparative, like midrashic meanings, where you're actually looking at themes across similar occurrences in the text. For example, you'll see lots of, here's an example just off the top of my head, right? If you think about the burning bush, the Ark of the Covenant, and the supposedly the wooden cross that Jesus was crucified on were all made of acacia wood, right? That was all shittim wood that was across the entire Bible. So when you look at these stories, there's a pattern there. Why was Jonah, underground for 3 days, and then what came, back to the surface, which is an allusion to other things that happened for 3 days, and then there was a resurrection, for example. So that's where Darash comes in to find comparative intellectual interpretations. And then finally, Sod is the secret, the mystery, or the esoteric and mystical part of the things that usually have to come through inspiration or revelation, right? These things can't be shown to you. You have to you have to come to that conclusion yourself. They are revealed. So you can see a lot of patterns, a lot of similarities of the literal, what you see, you know, exoterically, and then you get all the way up to the fourth level, which is an esoteric revelation. So let's tie this to Masonry for a bit. Think about the 4 states we pass through on our way to becoming a Master Mason. Right? As a profane, you're supposed to be in your rude and imperfect state, overcome by your animal appetites and passions, and governed by your earthly endeavors. Right? But then, as an entered apprentice, we're taught to tame our passions. Right? We're literally taught to subdue our passions. Which represent our emotional state before we elevate further. Then we get past to the degree of fellowcraft, which represents our middle age and our pursuit of knowledge. We reach an intellectual level, building upon the foundation of our emotional stability, right? This is why the fellowcraft degree is very intellectual with all of the different arts and sciences that we get taught. And then finally, we reach the sublime degree of Master Mason, which we're taught spiritual lessons, right? That should ascend your earthly, emotional, intellectual desires. So pretty neat how this framework just plugs right on in. So when we put all this information together, we actually get a clear picture about what the 4 levels of the 4 worlds actually mean. So let's throw all these together, because I threw a lot at you all at once. Let's start right at the bottom. The bottom level, we have Asiya, right? This is the practical world. This is the world of earthly pleasures and impulses. This relates to the symbolism of the square in Albert Pike's works. It being the lowest level, it relates to the physical body, the senses, and it's the animal and material nature of our being, right? The soul of Nefesh lives here. And the tarot is governed by the pentacles with regards to wealth and material pleasures. The classical element of earth is obvious, the obvious alchemical choice here, with the red clay that through God's action formed Adam, or Adam. Once our earthly pleasures have been met, very much like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, then we can rise to Yetzirah, which is the world of emotions. Right? The variety of emotions that humans can have demonstrate a spiritual capability that is above the physical world. Right? The ebb and flow of our emotions are best symbolized by the ebb and flow of the classical element of water and the cups of the tarot that help inform them. The Ruark of the spirit helps us to align our emotional movements toward those things that are edifying, and to those that help us understand our own potential internalized spirit and kind of tune into the divine emotions of our soul. Remember, this is the purple color, which is blending between the earthly and the spiritual, representing that union of as above and so below. We next elevate to Bariah, the world of creation, the world of the intellect, where ideas reside. You know, this is where logic and planning triumph over our reactions and our fears. The blue classical element of air, reaching the heavens, is a fit symbol for this use. And the evolutionary neocortex part of the human brain is where our abstract ideas and logic and language are found, and where Bariah resides. Again, self-actualization, we're getting to that level of applying our knowledge instead of trying to worry about where we're going to eat and sleep that night. And then Neshama, meaning breath, holds the divine intellect in the soul and the highest internalized potential. And then finally, Absolute is the culmination, right? It's the world of emanation and the world of the Holy Spirit. It assigns its purity as the color white, which presumably, this is a fun little fact, presumably was the same color as the twisted linens of the garments of the high priests. Right? We get the literal colors of the high priests' garments, but we assume through Talmudic interpretation that the twisted linens contained that fourth color that was missing, the white. Alchemical fire purifies everything in this final stage of transformation, and the kindling of wooden wands represents this in the tarot. The fourth level of the soul, Chaya, is one where we're living with the divine, right? We're having a spiritual awareness of an all-encompassing soul and a state of complete nullification of the ego, right? The spiritual working tool of the compasses can be found here. Okay. Now, given this understanding of the four worlds, how should we apply them? Okay, so think of them as a framework for your intellectual endeavors. Now, first acknowledge that you will not be in any of these states 100% of the time. Okay, so the goal is not to always be in Bariya or Absolute. Okay, it's impossible, right? If you're actively in a flow state or working on a project or a problem at work, you're going to be focused in the world of the earthly world of Asiya, right? But then when you step back and you're home from work, and you really think about your relationships, your happy and your sad memories, you think about that jerk back in the office, you know, how your favorite sports team did, right? You're now in the square in the middle of your Yetzirah. And then even possibly when hearing this presentation, you're contemplating more abstract concepts presented here in Bariya, you know, and then finally, after your devotions on the Sabbath, you could temporarily peek into the world of the Absolute. Okay, the purpose is not to try and be in one or the other, but to understand and have self-awareness of you are mentally and how others perceive you. If you're quick to temper, realize that you're living in the world of Yetzirah, right? You need to work on elevating your thoughts toward more intellectual pursuits of Bariya. For example, if someone cuts you off on the highway, right, your first reaction might be to yell at the guy, honk, use some words that you wouldn't use in front of your mother, right? But instead, you should move above your emotions and try to think about, okay, let's stop, take a deep breath, try to see things from a different point of view, and consider other options, like the person that cut you off, maybe racing home from work to see a dying family member, right? So you need to elevate your thoughts and elevate your understanding. Being a fan of all these change management and leadership books, there was a really good one I read a while back called Switch, How to Change When Change is Hard by Chip and Dan Heath. And they actually have a really creative metaphor for effective change, both personally and in organizations. They use these three metaphors. Imagine a man is riding an elephant down a path. As much as the logical rider, our intellect, our logic tells the elephant where to go, the elephant being our emotions will usually do whatever it wants. So our emotions will usually overpower the intellect. We see this all the time, right? Where emotionally, logically we know the right thing to do, but emotionally we usually do the emotional thing first. We all know, let's use the example of trying to lose weight. We all know we should be eating better and exercising. Well, but today is a special occasion, or I'll start tomorrow. I deserve this, right? That's where the emotions trump our logic, our logical brain. And so, and even if the rider and the elephant are aligned, if your logic and your emotions are together, but the path, our environment isn't clear, progress won't be made. If the material world does not get you into your desires, you could still end up going nowhere. So upon learning of the four world structure and plugging that into this framework, I immediately thought of like the physical world as the path, Asiya, our emotional states, Yetzirah, as the elephant, and our intellectual rider as Bariya. And so this doubly confirms that if our environment is clear, our emotions are calm, and we give ourselves space to ponder the abstract, especially on the thoughts about our creator, we can actually set ourselves up for a smooth transition, elevation into Absolute, right? They say and this is all based off of, psychological research as well. Like if you want to eat less, literally use smaller plates, right? That is setting your path. That is changing your physical world to get to overcome the emotional world, right? You physically eat on smaller plates, you will eat less. That's been scientifically proven. And so there's a way you can think about how am I setting up my earthly endeavors, my emotional endeavors, my intellectual endeavors, so I can get to my spiritual endeavors. Another way to think of it too, if you are in your spiritual prayer, right? When you pray, you can pray in the system as well. Pray for positive action in the world. Pray for the, help me with this, help me with that. Let other people heal. Pray for others, but then pray for yourself to be more temperate and caring emotionally, at the emotional level, and then pray for more wisdom. Right? Pray for your intellect to grow, and then finally pray to know your Creator better every day. Okay, so I encourage each of you to consider not only the practical application of the Kabbalistic tree of life, but then this nested structure of the four worlds that can serve as a guide for not only your spiritual endeavors, but your daily interactions with society, right? If done with purpose, our usual thoughts will tend toward a more enlightened state. And so with that ends the formal part of the presentation, and I'll really kind of open it up for questions. And as with most of my esoteric presentations, I have to put a table in here. And spreadsheets are awesome. And so this is one way you can kind of read across. I didn't label my columns, but I'm sure you'll forgive me for that. But I now open it up for questions, comments, thoughts, and anything else.
John, I thought that was fantastic. I've never really looked at the four worlds that way, especially in Masonic terms, showing with the profane, entered apprentice, fellowcraft, and master mason. And it reminds me a lot of the four worlds that McNulty talks about in The Way of the Craftsman as well, talking about the physical, the mental, the spiritual. So, I mean, I think there are interesting correlations there, especially Kabbalistically. But anyway, I love the presentation. I think it's fantastic. And brothers, if you have any questions for John, please feel free to unmute yourself. I saw Al sitting there taking notes diligently. Now we see Al trying to unmute himself.
And I did. That's pretty good. No, I took a lot of notes. I've heard some of this before. John has, this has kind of evolved into, it's even better now than the last time I heard this. But I think it's very fascinating. And you can take this kind of structure, and apply it. It kind of correlates to the Scottish Rite colors too a little bit. Of course, I think the white and red's kind of, it's kind of interesting, right? But with the absolute and whatnot, but it's an interesting framework that I think, study this a little bit, and I think it would help guide your moral and intellectual landscape in your day-to-day life. Because some of this I've heard, John's talking about the Yitzhara. I stay in my emotional state way too much. And it takes an effort for me to get out of that and get to an intellectual sometimes, because I let my passions overwhelm me. So I'm sure I'm not the only one that struggles with that sort of thing. So it's definitely a good path or a set of paths that you can take to grow, not only as a Mason, but as a human being.
Yeah, I mean, and that's about it. It's just really having self-awareness, just to think, where am I right now, right? Because you'll go up and down, but just being able to be reflective, be contemplative, and say, why am I so upset over this? What's going on here? Am I focused too much at this level? Is this, am I acting in the best representation of my faith, right? Maybe I should be doing something different. Or am I just like at work? I don't have time for contemplating the universe. I have a job to do. I gotta punch in at the clock. So, and that's okay, right? Just make sure that you're balancing everything in life comes with balance.
Right.
Hey, John, I got a question for you. So great presentation. Um, it's too bad you can't pull something like that off for TMR, but that's okay. One question I had for you is, when you look at these four worlds, do you have any recommendations for folks on how to better themselves at living in certain pieces of these, and how do folks better move between them? Is it self-reflection, self-study? What do they recommend?
Oh man, that I'm sure there's been 1,000 self-help books written on that that topic alone. Um, but I think I like the structure of this because to me, it just at looking at it from a purely like you have to pass step one before you get to step two. It's logical, and that we're taught that, right? In our Masonic career, we're taught that we have to subdue our passions first. That's why it's the first thing we're taught. You look at other mystery traditions, right? They teach their initiates and their candidates to like have silence, right? Even monastic orders, right? Practice silence, because you gotta like slow your roll before you're even allowed to start contemplating higher thoughts. And so there's some intelligent design that different systems all have these relatable patterns that you have to move beyond the physical world and then really see where you are emotionally, calm your emotions, whether that's through whatever system you use, whether meditation, anger management, right? But you're never going to appreciate. You can dabble in higher concepts of spirituality and intellectualism, but we've seen people like this at work, right? Where you can tell they just fly off the handle over everything, and then you don't really have a good professional relationship with them because they're just stuck in their emotional level. And then you see people that are very that have a high EQ, like emotional quotient, right? That know how they can be angry, but they don't have to show it. They don't have to. They can be professional about it, right? Because they've calmed that emotional side. Now they have to take out their emotions somewhere else. I'm not saying pack it away in a little tiny ball until it explodes, but that you can see people who have elevated their thought, their process of their mind up there, and we all know people like that, right? People that you never see get upset, right? We have that one friend, that old grandfather, or whatever it was, that's like, man, that guy is at peace. Like nothing gets this guy riled up, because, and you can tell they're already up at a higher elevated plane of their thought process. And so I think that's really the goal. So there's tons of ways to do that. But I think it's just as a basic framework is a good way for you to self-reflect and say, where am I right now? Am I, because if you're focused, again, if you're focused on your deity and you're like, you become a religious zealot, then you are neglecting the physical world, right? Which, is not a bad thing in itself, but it is when you need to like pay your bills and feed your family, right? There has to be some physical element to your life. So it's just having self-awareness to know where you are in the structure.
Thanks, Sean. Fantastic job. Loved
Thanks,
it.
Jason.
Yeah, and one other point, John, when you mentioned that I thought of when you were just speaking, and that was good comments too, Jason, and I don't mind hearing your baby, by the way. But when you were talking about, well, sometimes you need to have smaller plates to put it back in the physical world to help you control, your passion for eating or whatever. So I've noticed since I've left Virginia, I don't have as many people to talk to, the kind of talks you and Jason and I and others used to have, back in the day. So this is a good outlet for me, these kinds of things, especially now since we can't even, meet in our lodges, and it's a little tougher to get out with friends. I live a long way from Matt Parker and Matt Moore and those kinds of things. So it's a little more difficult. So this provides some of that framework to help me keep on the path, because I've noticed when I distance myself from things too much and I get too remote is when my inner animal just starts, start getting pissed off, at everything, whatever. And
Absolutely.
that's not good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're all guilty of staying in one of these states for too long, right? Mm-hmm. While we're getting the next question up, there was one more slide I added in here, which is a quote attributed to Eleanor Roosevelt. It really comes back to the turn of the century, Henry Thomas Buckle. And again, consider everything we just talked about, but it's an interesting quote that says, "Great minds discuss ideas, average minds discuss events, and small minds discuss people." Right. So practically applying these four worlds, right? You don't want to have a small mind. You don't want to gossip. You don't want to talk about people. You don't want to focus on the earthly, right? You can start to get what's the emotional side of what events are going on, right? We got enough emotional stuff going on in 2020 right now, but great minds actually discuss the ideas, the focus on the intellectual pursuit to better understand and turn that knowledge into wisdom. And that's certainly a framework that we should all be looking at. So I think it's just neat how even this quote plugs right on. Any other thoughts, comments, questions?
I don't know, John. I'm still trying to process all this. Brother Stephen O'Donnell, our wonderful brother in Scotland, has a question. I just saw it pop up. His hand was raised. Stephen, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask.
Hi, good evening, good morning, whatever you are. I guess it's good evening there still. That was a fantastic presentation, and I like the way you've got this chart sitting here. It's just a thought about air being the separator between the physical and the spiritual. And like on this chart, you've got the physical and emotion, and the only way you can reach the spiritual is by intellect, by logical. And the same as with the entered apprentice, the only way you can reach the master mason is through intellect. So, and we were talking a couple of weeks back on Young Mason's education program, the fact of air being the separator between the physical and the spiritual. I was just wondering on your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think
Does that make sense at all?
it does a little bit. You look at like the alchemical keys to the Masonic obligations that I know Tim Hogan has written extensively on how alchemy fits into our degree system. And when you talk about air, it's really about the spirit. It's really about the distillation phase of alchemy, right? Where you're actually separating from the world. You're purifying.
Mm-hmm.
You're starting to acknowledge the divine spirit as well. Again, that's where the Ruark fits in. I know it has it at the emotional level in this chart, but the divine spirit starts to come in there. So it is a separator, as you said. I like the word you put there. That you actually have to differentiate yourself away from the earthly and the water in order to get to this connotation of the spiritual fire.
Yeah, and the reason it kind of jumps in like this as well is because we were having this. Well, basically, the education program is for young Masons, and we were going through the first degree tracing board and the implications of the three pillars, and discussing whether they act as a separation. So in a sense, the three pillars is the intellect, and it separates the heavens and the earth. And I was just thinking that this chart is quite helpful for people to maybe see that.
Well,
interesting.
True on that. I'm going to.
It's late here. I'm just contemplating myself.
I'm going to throw the link for everyone to view the slides over in the Zoom. And if you want to copy and paste that someone over into Facebook land, feel free to do that too. So at least you can view the slides at your leisure to go back to anything in particular as well.
Yeah, I actually took a screenshot of that chart. I thought that was extremely fascinating. And so, John, let me ask you, aside from Earth, Wind, and Fire, are there any other 70s bands that you like? Maybe Casey and the Sunshine Band, Kool and the Gang? I mean, you know.
You like Spirit.
Yes, Spirit, yes. It is the age of Aquarius, after all.
Matt, I think you just came up with the next presentation. How cool is that?
Oh, my God.
Hey, John, can I pick your brain for a minute?
Jump right on in.
Appreciate it, brother. So real quick, I am going to ask you a question. I know we were talking initially about sort of some Eastern worlds and sort of how the world is, divided up along that path. But when you were giving the presentation, one thing that really stood out to me, and I'm going to kind of take this in the path that I know. How familiar are you with the Bhagavad Gita, right?
Very little, very, very little.
All right. So the Bhagavad Gita is of course it has many different things, but at its root, I would call it a dissemination of yogic knowledge. And within it, there are actually 4 forms of yoga. There's Raja Yoga, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Jnana Yoga. So Karma Yoga is the yoga of action, right? It is the idea of taking your physical self, right? Jnana Yoga is the yoga of knowledge. So attaining your oneness with God through the path of knowledge. Raja Yoga is very similar to sort of meditative practice, introspective practices, and things like that. And then Bhakti Yoga is the path of like pure devotion. And I thought that what you talked about actually lined up really neatly with those 4 ideas right there.
I love it. Yeah, that's fantastic. So I'd love to learn more about that.
Yeah, so I guess now I have to have an addendum to the stuff I'm supposed to be sending you. So, but I wasn't sure if that would at all play into this whole idea.
Yeah, I think so. And again, if it doesn't match perfectly, I think that's not the point, right? There are similar systems. We've talked in the past. There's many paths to the top of the mountain, and it's whichever one works for you. And one thing that I try to do, like when I throw that table together at the end, is I try to really show the abstract similarities, if there are any, and I try to be as consistent to the research as I can, right? I'm not trying to create my own interpretation. I'm trying to build upon what others have pulled together. But when you see those similarities, there's, I'm a firm believer there are no coincidences, right? That the universe has some synchronicity built in, and that, right? And so you're like, wait a minute, that just feels right. There has to be something there, right? So that's what I try to do when I pull these systems together. I try to find patterns and see if those patterns make sense. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, man, that's so super beautiful. I mean, in a sense, it's like look for what brings them together, not what divides them. That's the whole idea.
Right? They should teach Masons that.
Maybe they should just teach people that.
How about it?
So, we have any other questions, comments, threats, anything?
I have a question. Hi, John. Great presentation.
Thank you.
With the 4 states that you mentioned, could you tie that in with the Earth as it moves around the zodiac signs? And does it go through those different stages?
Thank you. One piece of my research, I didn't get a chance to dive deeper into it, but I'll bring up the slides again here and share my screen. The classical element alignment of like ASEA to Earth. Yetzirah to water, Berea to air, and Etzelut to fire. Those can be tied to like the fire signs, the air signs of the zodiac, etc. And should have all those similar connotations tied to those as well. So when you think about ASEA, think about the earth signs in the zodiac, what that triplicate looks like, acts like, and then that gives you a little hint about where their defaults are. If that makes sense.
Right.
Or personality defaults. Mm-hmm.
And so if we want to connect to the spiritual side, it's best when the Earth is in a fire signs and stuff like that, right?
That's a Jamie Paul Lamb question.
Okay. All right. No, thank you.
But I definitely think you're onto something.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Brother Renee, you have your hand raised, but feel free to jump right in.
Hey, John, I love the presentation. I think it's a really beautiful, and I love when they do presentation on Kabbalistic stuff. I love that you in your presentation you had the tarot cards, you had the sword, the wand, the cup, and the pentacles, and I know that they relate to the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac, which is Leo, Aquarius, Scorpio, and Taurus. And, those can actually correspond to the 4 worlds that you have on the Kabbalistic tree, to ASEA, Priya, Yetzirah, and Atzilut. And you said something very interesting in the presentation, Yakida, which apparently is actually tied to planet Mercury. Because and Mercury, as in the because I can see that your presentation has some alchemy in it, and yes, Yakida, and yes, exactly, yeah. The gematria to Yakida is actually 37, and the glyph for Mercury is actually 37 as well. It's the 2 horns is 11, the circle is 22, and this cross is 4. And you actually, can you go to the slide with Jacob, and you said something with Jacob, which actually has an alchemicals also. And you said, I don't know if you're familiar, where was the place that he actually wrestled the angel in it. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Yes, I did not include that in this context, but right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Where he wrestled with God. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Pineal, yeah. And I believe Jacob means heel catcher. Exactly, yes, the pineal gland, yeah. And you can see that it actually relates to alchemy and stuff. And another thing I love that you put with that was
thank you for tying it together for everyone. That's
no,
a great catch.
Yeah, he put his head on the stone, etc. But I love the fact that that you have the Kabbalistic tree. And the reason I brought up the zodiacs, the 4 fixed signs, because they actually tied to the 4 worlds, and they are for the name God, Yod He Vov He, right, without the vowels. And what's very interesting is the gematria to I believe is actually 26, right? But if you add up the zodiac signs and in order, as in Taurus being the 2nd sign, and Leo being the 5th, and Scorpio the 8th, and Aquarius the 11th, you actually have 26, right? And in the middle pillar of the Kabbalistic tree, Yakida corresponds with Kether, right? And you have as Kether as 1, you have Tiferet as 6, Yes, it is 9, and Makuf 10. That's actually also 26. And you can see it's very interesting. And there actually is probably the 4 words connect all the way to God. Yeah, exactly. Yes, yes. And I love your presentation. You're a great speaker, and I learned a lot actually from it. New things actually tied to masonry, which I didn't know. And you said something with the white, which is interesting because of the aprons, you know. But it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's
Thank
like
you.
I'd like to hear you talk, like maybe this Saturday coming up.
Oh, thank you.
I was just getting ready to plug that. Yeah, brother Renee is going to be giving a presentation this coming Saturday for refracted light. And Renee, if I'm not mistaken, I believe your presentation is on Boda. Is that correct?
Yes, it's going to be on Boda, Builders of the Attitude.
What you want to give a quick shameless plug for that?
Sure, it would be Saturday, and it would be basically on the not history of Boda. There's a lot of podcasts that done, you know, history on Boda and Paul Foster case. I would just explain a little bit on Boda because for certain states they don't have the opportunity to have pronails. Not every state has a pronails. And in New York City, we have one of those study groups, and we have a lodge. Not many states have one. So I have, you know, that we have the initiations, and not every state has that opportunity to do that. So I will talk about what is a study group and a little bit of how we have ties to the Golden Dawns and stuff like that. So there's a lot of history on Paul Foster case that's really good out there. A cult personality did one on him, so beautiful. So I wouldn't talk about Paul case's history.
I can't wait.
Thank you.
All right, let's do one last round. Any further questions or comments or observations for John? Now, John, I do have one question that has puzzled me a little bit, and looking at the tarot cards, and you posted the ace of each suit. The ace of cups, I noticed the cups has what looks like an upside down M on there. I mean, I wouldn't think that would be a W, but that's one thing that has always, that's something I've always wondered about, what that upside down M may have meant to Arthur Edward Waite.
You know, I don't know. That's awesome.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Something we need to look into. That's awesome.
It's a W for water, right?
I think that's what Renee is saying.
Yeah.
Renee, can you clarify? Is that what you're saying? That's a W for water?
Yes, it's a W for water, but it also could be an upside down M to mem, which also means water in Hebrew. But yeah, it's because the ace of cups, it's related to water. So, but yeah, you know, I'm not a professional on AD Waite's deck, but I would say it's connected to water.
Okay, that's interesting. I could go along with that.
There we go. We decided.
So, that's it. It's water.
It's done. Case
who
closed.
Cares what Waite wanted? It's water. All right.
Good catch.
Worshipful Brother John, thank you so much. That was a fantastic presentation. I'm sorry it couldn't be streamed over to Facebook, but we will definitely post it there for anyone that missed it. And it will also be posted to the Refracted Light YouTube channel. So again, thank you so much. It's been fantastic. Great presentation as always.
Thank you.
Yeah, we hope you're doing well, and you know, we'd love to have you back again sometime. Not to keep going to the same well over and over, but man, you just you and RJ and Jason. I mean, just give some fantastic
all I'm going to say is everyone here and everyone listening, you got some extra time on your hands, go get a topic and research it. Like, you know what I mean? There's no capitalization on no crowding out the market of good research. So now's the
Speaking
time
of
to
topics, what's on deck for the Masonic Roundtable this Thursday?
This Thursday, we actually have a topic by the Lodge historian of Potomac Lodge in D.C., who is the owner and caretaker of George Washington's gavel. So he's going to go into great detail on the history of that thing, where it's been, and anything else you want to know about that. So that'll be fun to pick his brain. And I think what I like is it's not going to be a canned presentation, right? I always love when you can pick a history person's brain, right? You can actually ask some really good historical questions. So so stay tuned for that.
Awesome. I can't wait to see it. All right, well, brothers, I appreciate everybody stopping by, hanging out with us tonight. John, thank you again for your presentation. And we will do it again next Thursday. Speaking of Brother Rene Perez, not only is he going to be speaking this Saturday for Refracted Light, but we also have him set for, September 15th to speak for the North Carolina Masonic Research Society. So if you haven't gotten your fix of Brother Perez tonight, you've got a couple more opportunities. And next week, we actually have Paul Rana coming on to talk about the Martinist Order, which is incredibly fascinating, something that I am intimately familiar with, and just really can't wait to see that or hear Paul's presentation. So with that, I want to wish everyone a good night, and we will see you next week.